Hello everyone, today I'm watching Football War, MiniWars number 2 by Oversimplified. And just looking at the video right now, I'm getting a warning about suicide or self-harm topics, which... how is that in a oversimplified video? Makes no sense to me. But anyway, I've never heard of a football war. I can't imagine how a war could be caused by football. And I say that as a huge fan of the sport. I live in Poland, which is in Europe. We're huge fans of football, but I can't imagine anyone ever going to war because of it. So I'm sure there has to be more to it. So let's find out what it is.
Quick, you have 2 seconds to name these two countries.
Ecuador?
You're wrong, unless you got it right.
I don't know.
Then good
Honduras?
job. They are, of course, Honduras and El Salvador. One thing these two countries have in common is being fanatic about football. Or if you're a freedom-loving patriot, soccer. But do they love it so much they would go to war over it?
No such thing as soccer.
They would, and that is
it's
no bueno.
Football.
If you look at these two countries, you might notice one major difference, and that is that this one is a lot bigger than this one. However, this one had a larger population than this one, made up mostly of farmers, and there wasn't enough land for them to live and work on. So they started moving from El Salvador to Honduras in search of land, and by the 1960s, a huge number of illegal immigrants had crossed over the border from El Salvador. Meanwhile, in Honduras,
just build a
it's
wall.
1963, and this guy has just staged a military coup
and make the Hondurans pay for it.
and is now the military leader
I
of
mean,
the
El
country. He
Salvador.
immediately began harassing the peasants' unions and other left-wing groups, but he's a little insecure about the legitimacy of his leadership. So he holds an election and wins, but then the opposing party says, hey man, that election was clearly corrupt and fraudulent, and also you've been bribed by the rich American banana companies who are taking all of our bananas tax-free, and now our economy is in ruins, and everyone started to get mad at him. Now if you ever find yourself the barely legitimate military leader of a corrupt Central American country, and you start getting into hot water, here's a bit of advice that has been tried and tested throughout the centuries. Blame something else. So he blamed the Salvadoran immigrants for stealing all the land and all the jobs and ruining Honduras. The immigrants found themselves under attack by the hostile locals. Egged on by the rich American banana companies who wanted all the bananas to themselves, the Honduran government began evicting Salvadoran immigrants who had been living on the land for generations and started sending them back to El Salvador. The Salvadoran elite were furious and protested, citing moral reasons, but in reality, they were just getting a little too crowded. So tensions were about as high as they could be, but then... It's the 1970 World Cup qualifiers, and both countries finished top of their qualifying tables, so it was now time for them to... The 1970 World Cup qualifiers, and both countries finished top...
Honduras, Costa Rica, I don't know, probably Guatemala or something. El Salvador, was Dutch Guyana still a country? Let's say they were. Damn, why do I gotta do all the work here? You look it up if you want to know so bad. P.S. don't forget to like and subscribe.
Top of their qualifying team.
Exactly, like and subscribe.
Time for them to play against each other in a series of matches. The first match took place in Honduras. The night before the game, Hondurans gathered outside the Salvadoran team's hotel, making noise and taunting them. The next day, Honduras defeated the exhausted Salvadorans with a late 90th minute goal. After the match, a young Salvadoran fan, unable to bear her country's defeat, shot herself. Disturbingly, the Salvadoran government glorified the incident.
I suddenly understand the suicide warning. That's a bit extreme. I don't know. I don't think I would kill myself if I saw that my national team lost.
And made her into a national hero. And at the next game, fans brought pictures of her to the stadium. Emotions were running high as the next match took place in El Salvador.
They're going to do the same
thing.
thing.
The tables were turned. The Hondurans had to endure a sleepless night in their hotel, and the next day, before the match started, instead of the Honduran flag, the Salvadorans raised a dirty rag. So great job at reducing tensions. El Salvador won decisively over the exhausted Hondurans, while spectators battled in the stands. Team Honduras fled home in a bulletproof bus with rocks being thrown at them, and the Honduran coach reportedly told his players that they were lucky they lost. In response to the defeat, Hondurans began terrorizing.
So, I mean, the last game, it honestly just depends where it's held. If it's held in Honduras, El Salvador is going to lose. If it's the other way around, Honduras will lose. There's no good outcome here. I can see how this could lead to a war.
In some cases reportedly throwing them off their land and burning down their homes, and the immigrants began fleeing back to El Salvador. The final game in Mexico would decide who went to the World Cup.
Okay,
it was
it's in
close,
Mexico.
but El Salvador came out victorious, knocking Honduras out of the tournament. The atmosphere is riotous, literally, and back in Honduras, attacks on the Salvadoran immigrants further increased. This was too much for El Salvador to bear, with its people under attack and an unmanageable refugee
Imagine attacking someone from a different country because their football team won against your own. How can you be that fucking petty? Like,
crisis on its hands, El Salvador severed all diplomatic ties with Honduras and declared war.
over fucking football. All of this because of a sport.
The football war is also known as the 100 Hours War because that's how long it lasted, making it one of the shortest wars in history.
So it wasn't
El
that
Salvador
bad.
started by carrying out air raids on strategic locations within Honduras, including Toncontin International Airport, which prevented the Honduran Air Force from getting into the sky. Then, with their superior army, they began an invasion along two major roads, complete with light tanks and infantry. Their advance was rapid, and they were quickly approaching the Honduran capital. Then, the Organization of American States met in a bit of a panic and unanimously agreed that war between El Salvador and Honduras was a bad thing and probably shouldn't continue. So they went to El Salvador and said, "Can you please stop invading?" And El
War is bad. War is not good unless we do it.
Salvador declared, "Not until they stop."
Then
being
it's okay.
jerks," and so the war went on. The Honduran Air Force finally got into the sky, and with aid from neighboring Nicaragua, they successfully carried out air raids on Salvadoran air bases and oil facilities, crippling the Salvadoran supply line and stopping their advance dead. Caught in a bit of a stalemate, the situation was no longer advantageous to El Salvador, so when the Organization of American States once again asked them to stop and agreed to ensure the safety of the Salvadoran immigrants, El Salvador relented, and a ceasefire was organized on the 18th of July. Then the OAS said, "Can you now please withdraw your troops from Honduras? No, please, no, please, no, please, no. Do it or we'll sanction you." You know what? Just for you, I'll do it. So El Salvador pulled its troops out of
Trade
Honduras on the
sanctions
2nd
always
of August,
work.
and with casualties in the thousands, the war was over. The economies of both nations were damaged by the war, and El Salvador didn't have the capability to take care of all the returning immigrants, a crisis that eventually helped cause a civil war. The war left behind land and border disputes, some of which are still a cause of tension to this day. El Salvador went on to play in the World Cup, but lost every
They
match
probably
they
lost.
played and didn't make it past the
Yeah.
group stage. So in
I mean, let's be honest, they stood no chance against anyone else back then.
the end, nobody achieved anything, and there were no winners. Except for this guy.
The Americans, they always win. Yeah, that was a really fucking good video. So much destruction and death caused because of football. And there was no conclusion. And it caused a civil war in El Salvador after. Two countries' economies were destroyed. All of that because of football. I can't imagine that. Jesus. Well, like I said earlier, like and subscribe, comment. I'll see you in the next video.